Reverend Samuel Rodriguez is the president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference. He is regularly featured in a wide variety of media outlets that you may have seen even during the past week. But more importantly than his media presence is a real finger on the pulse of grassroots evangelical Hispanic Protestantism in this country, and a community that is both growing in size and public importance. And so I think brings some great insight to our discussions today. Thanks for coming all the way from California to join us, Reverend Rodriguez, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you. Oh, truly, I'm honored to be here. And in light of what we do with the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, what I really do is I teach Jim Wallis the Macarena, salsa, and merengue. And as a result of years of training him and teaching him how to speak Spanish and dance, that he invited me and said, Sam, I need you to come, and also working as his caddy. I love Jim Wallis. I'm here because of my commitment to a dear friend and to you, for you to understand a little bit regarding this issue of immigration and what it means. There are multiple threads of implications here. And let me begin by breaking down this term. It's difficult not to speak about immigration, and I know there's arguments about this, without framing it in the context. It's not ethnocentric. It's not a Hispanic narrative exclusively. The idea that immigration reform is exclusively about Latino and Hispanics, it's a misnomer. Absolutely not. Notwithstanding, demographically, the reality is the vast majority of undocumented individuals in this nation happen to be of Hispanic descent. And if you understand the angst is embedded in the very definition of the construct, Hispanic. The word panic is in the middle of Hispanic. And it's causing a lot of panic right now. Recently, I spoke at a major missions conference, a few days ago. And it was completely, I say this for the purpose of framing, not in a condescending term or grasping at labels, but you'll understand this. It was a white-only gathering. I was the darkest person in the room. And I was addressing the issue of missiology and what it meant for 21st century evangelicalism. And I broke down the word Hispanic. I spoke about his, capital H, meaning el big hombre in the sky. And I talked about panic. So I basically said, we may very well be God's panic for whatever reason. And we're scaring the living daylights out of something in our community that really needs to come to light. Evangelicalism and immigration reform. We have to frame it around the reality of the cross. The cross is the symbol of, it's the universal symbol of Christianity. You see a cross, you think Christianity. Well, that cross is both vertical and horizontal. It's both salvation and transformation. It's both vertical covenant and horizontally community. It's community. It is Billy Graham and it's Martin Luther King Jr. It's John 3:16 and it's Matthew 25. It's faith and it's public policy. It's sanctification and it's service. It's anointing and activism. It's righteousness and justice. The cross is both vertical and horizontal. It's not either or, it's both and. The strongest part of the cross is the nexus, the point of convergence, where the vertical intersects with the horizontal. That's where our theology and our moral imperative lines up with our horizontal activism and our public policy. That's where we, arguably so, and we'll discuss this in a few minutes, that's where we need to address critical issues within the American political landscape. Not from a faith narrative, but we know historically that in America there has never been a viable social or civil rights movement without the faith voice leading the charge. There is a requirement, a de facto and maybe de jure prerequisite to contextualize the moral imperative of every single viable and sustainable civil rights or social rights movement in America. From the abolitionist movement to women's suffrage to other movements subsequently, faith leads the way. Dr. King in the 1960s would best embody the idea that the faith movement leads the way. On immigration reform, we could argue whether or not the church has led the way. Now, we're there now, and we're there. Jen and I were speaking about the fact that we're helping frame the moral imperative, but has the faith community, and when I say the church, let me speak collectively for the faith community, The faith community, has the faith community led the way on immigration reform? And if we have not led the way on immigration reform, maybe that's the reason we haven't had the positive outcome that we are all inclined in seeing come around. And I'll speak to the political realities in a second where we currently stand. So it is faith must lead. That moral imperative, I'm speaking about the vertical now. The vertical part of the cross needs to be addressed. Immigration reform must be addressed via a platform of a righteousness and justice movement. By the way, on a side note, immigration has already done some incredible things as it pertains to faith in America. There are some good things that have come out of this immigration reform debate. I'll give you a couple. First, we have evangelicals holding hands with Roman Catholics, marching together. Now, you got to put this in perspective. 30 years ago, it would be difficult. It would require a miracle to see evangelicals coming together with Roman Catholics on excluding abortion, any other issue. And to have evangelicals and Roman Catholics and Mormons and other faith narratives come together on this issue is truly unprecedented. We have never seen the collective Christian community, at least, come together with so much energy, with so much commitment. We're talking about leadership now, not necessarily the pew, but leadership on one issue. Second, in respect to my community, Hispanic faith believers, Catholic or evangelical, just the Hispanic faith believers, and that's almost synonymous, that's almost redundant. Pew Research, March 2009, confirmed again in October 2009, Luis Lugo, Pew Research. You could Google that. Great study on the religious faith landscape. It's impossible. When you say Hispanic American, Hispanic Americans are people of faith. Over 90% Christian. You're either Catholic or you're evangelical. And there's very little middle ground. So when you talk about Hispanic American Christianity, it's like talking about collectively referring to the Hispanic American community. But we were never active. Hispanic American Christians, Catholic and evangelicals, within our DNA, our cultural DNA, we have this embedded thread that political activism is not a manifestation of your faith narrative. Quite the contrary. Political activism speaks to some sort of lukewarmness in your faith conviction. Now, you never mix politics with faith, ever. The separation of church and state is a reality, is a strong principle that's part of the Hispanic American ethos until immigration reform. We never had hundreds of thousands of Hispanics marching in America for any reason whatsoever until immigration reform. This is, whether you agree with it or not, it is our Selma. It is our Birmingham. It is our Mississippi. This is our civil social rights movement, ours meaning the Hispanic American community. We've never been down this road before. The closest thing we ever experienced was Cesar Chavez back in the 1960s, early 70s, United Farm Workers on issues of agriculture and fair labor and fair wages. But this is our civil rights movement for the Hispanic American community. So it's a first. And another element which is a first, an unprecedented manifestation of the immigration reform debate, is the partnership between the African American and the Hispanic community. It's a black-brown coalition that comes out of immigration reform. We have African Americans and Latinos coming together and having significant meetings on how they can work together to alleviate some of the social ills currently that are prevalent within our corresponding communities and neighborhoods. We share the barrio, the inner city, urban context. These are some of the good or positive outcomes that stem out of the moral imperative, the vertical component of the immigration reform debate. Let me give you why. Now you may argue, why is the faith community addressing immigration reform? Is there a biblical imperative for this? The answer is yes. Leviticus 19 in the Old Testament. We have a moral imperative. That's not the only one. It's the one we frequently use. Deuteronomy, there's some verses in Genesis. Of course, the Good Samaritan parable in the New Testament. And then you could argue Romans 13, which I'll get to in a second. The faith community comes along and says the following. The Bible talks about immigration, without a doubt. The Bible talks extensively about immigration. And it explicitly states the following. Treat the immigrant amongst you, the alien amongst you, as one of your own. For you were once aliens in Egypt. Treat them as one of your own. So there is a biblical imperative to make sure we treat the immigrant community with compassion, with love, with mercy, and we extend every single thread that we can as it pertains to making sure their human rights and their rights are protected. That includes Romans 13, by the way. There's a verse. The other side would say, but Romans 13 says, obey the laws of the land. So how do you reconcile treating the immigrant amongst us as one of our own with obeying the law of the land? And the way we do it vertically is that we speak to an agenda, not the agenda of the donkey nor the agenda of the elephant, but what we call the agenda of the lamb. The donkey and the elephant, they have their agenda. We have to speak from a Judeo-Christian or Christian imperative, we meaning this community that's addressing immigration reform, rather than one political agenda or the other. That's the vertical. Let me go through the horizontal. Where are we at politically? What's at stake? Vertically, the church says, here it is. You have approximately 11 million undocumented individuals. Deporting them is not practical. The last time we put millions of people on planes, trains, and automobiles, anyone have any historical reference of when that took place? When we saw millions of people in trains and being shipped somewhere? It does, yeah, the Holocaust. It's just, from a public relations standpoint globally, I had a debate one time with a very prominent congressman that kind of triggered. He was an integral part in triggering this immigration reform debate. And I mentioned the fact. He mentioned we should deport all of them, verbatim. Let's deport 11 million people. Let's put them on trains and get them out of here. And I said, well, the last time millions of people were put on trains, it really didn't work well. Not that we're comparing immigration to the Holocaust. However, just from an image standpoint, really, our image is already tarnished globally around the world. We're going to exacerbate this exponentially on steroids. Then I asked a question, how much will it cost to deport 11 million people? And how much will it cost law enforcement to find 11 million people? By the way, these immigrants, they can hide. Enjoy your journey. How much taxpayer money can you, and finally, at the end of the argument, he said, well, maybe it's not practical to deport 11 million, but we can deport a significant number of them. That number is still some ambiguous number that he's still not willing to relinquish. The church, the faith community says we can't deport them, and there's a reason why we can't deport them. We can't deport them because the vast majority, according to Pew, over 90. There's a figure that was just reinforced recently. Around 98% of these individuals, truth be told, the idea that 11 million people crossed over the Rio Grande, not true. Not true. 1/3 of these individuals came in here legally, flew in, stood, overstayed their visas. The idea that 11 million people want to become American citizens, inaccurate. 1/3 surveyed. How do you survey undocumented individuals? Aha. 1/3 responded and said, we would love to go back to our home and have a guest worker process where we can come back here, work, make some money, go back home. We're just trying to address poverty in our corresponding nations. 1/3 don't want to become, they just want to go back home and have that sort of fluidity. Another 1/3 say, look, we're not really committed to becoming citizens. We would be interested in permanent residency, demonstrating financial sustainability. The other 1/3 would say, we've been here for over 20 years. We consider our kids were born here. We consider ourselves Americans. We would love to really participate fully of this canopy we call the American experience. So there's a lot of perception versus reality. There were media voices that exacerbated the argument. Lou Dobbs, certain individuals on a certain network that I will not mention, Fox News, and others that really took the conversation to the next level and really pushed the envelope. And we saw stories. You would see this. You would see a story of they would discuss illegal immigration. And then the very next story is, by the way, an illegal immigrant killed a cheerleader in the suburbs of Virginia. And the message conveyed subliminally is what? Illegal immigrants kill cheerleaders in the suburbs of Virginia. And that was the message. It was intentional, by the way. And they pushed and pushed and pushed. We were this far away from passing immigration reform. When I was here every single week, I'm from California, and I flew on a red-eye flight every single week, and I met with members of Congress, and I met with the leadership, and I met with Senator Kennedy and helped with Senator McCain in drafting part of the legislation that was proposed. We were here. We were this far away. And because of these media voices, the oracles of, I call it xenophobia, nativism, and I know it sounds pretty harsh, we did not succeed. Is everyone who is opposed to immigration reform a racist? Absolutely not. Is everyone opposed to immigration reform someone committed to xenophobia or nativism? Absolutely not. I believe the vast majority of Americans believe this. We want them to come here legally, period. We just don't want them to come in here illegally. We want them to respect the rule of law. We're a sovereign nation. We have the right to protect our borders. We want them to come here legally. But if they come here legally, we have no problem with that whatsoever. I think the vast majority of Americans are right there. But the extreme, the fringes, those that are committed to demagoguery and political expediency, these voices are loud. These vociferous, strong, I can't even say it's clear articulation. It's just demagoguery. These voices are the voices that have trumped and hijacked the conversation. Horizontally, quickly, I talked about vertically, what's our imperative? It's Leviticus 19, it's the word, quote unquote, the word of God, it's our moral imperative. Let me speak to you about our horizontal commitment. Horizontally, there are some implications here. There are some political ramifications. Again, this is first and foremost a moral issue. It's a spiritual issue. It's a faith issue. It's a righteousness and justice issue. Notwithstanding, in Washington, D.C., I can address members of Congress, which we have. I've testified before the Senate on this. I've met with President Obama on so many occasions on this very issue. In Washington, D.C., I could come in there and preach all I want and talk about the power of faith and how God commands us. That's great. This is what Senator McCain looked at me and said, Reverend, that's wonderful. Tell me about your deliverable constituency. It's all about the votes. It's all about the votes. It's all about voting. Give us the numbers. That's how you sway public opinion in Washington, D.C. What's at stake? 60 million Hispanic Americans, the largest ethnic group in America. It is impossible to win the White House without the Hispanic American vote, and particularly in swing states like Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Florida. These are swing states right now. And of course, California and Texas, they have significant Hispanic populations. Pennsylvania is now emerging as a swing state because of the Hispanic influx in the eastern part of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Allentown, Bethlehem, Reading, York, Lancaster, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia. The Hispanic vote in these corresponding states continues to increase. It is impossible to win the White House without engaging the Hispanic electorate. Who has more to lose on this? We're talking about horizontally. The Republican Party. Why? 44% of Hispanics voted for George W. Bush in 2004. The African American community votes approximately anywhere between 90 and 92% straight down Democrat. The Hispanic community was shifting to 50-50. Projections were by Karl Rove. This is from Karl Rove. I met with Karl Rove on this right before this whole thing really took off. Projections were that if the Sensenbrenner bill would never have been presented, the Hispanic Americans would have voted somewhere between 53 and 55% in the 2006 midterm election. That number dipped significantly because of the immigration reform rhetoric. Who has more to lose here? The Republican Party. Because Ronald Reagan labeled in 1986 Hispanics as natural traditionalists. He said conservatives. On social values, Hispanics lean towards the right. There is a social conservative commitment. And I have to frame that too, because it's not Christian right or white evangelical right. It's right with compassion. And I don't want to justify the community. That's not my job or my role. But it's on values of life and other values, it is a center-right community without a doubt, which resonates more with the Republican Party. But then there's also a sense of economic populism that you can't deny, and about the role of government that's not necessarily on the same side. The Hispanics would more resonate with Abraham Lincoln's Republican Party than definitely not with the Pat Buchanan Republican Party or any other sort of the fringe right Republican Party. And in speaking to conservatives recently, and they were speaking about immigration reform, how that may impact Hispanics, I stated the following. The Tea Party movement is truly emerging right now in America, and my statement was the following. A Tea Party without chips and salsa is no party at all. And that, alienating the Hispanic American electorate is one of the most, how can I say, intellectually naive, cognitive dissonance, one of the stupidest things politically you could possibly do. How can you alienate 60 million voters? And right now, the Republican Party, with their stance on immigration reform, is alienating 60 million voters. They must have this long-term strategy no one's privy to. No one, absolutely no one. We can't figure it out, no one. In heaven, hell, in between, no one can figure it out right now. But it may well be a strategy. The current reality is this. There is a a possible solution. And let me give it to you quickly. What's the solution to this political conundrum and debate that's polarizing our communities? The solution may very well be a just integration strategy, one that reconciles Leviticus 19 with Romans 13. Leviticus 19 is the compassion verse. Romans 13 is the respect the rule of law verse. Chapter. We go in there and we say the following. Let's provide a just integration strategy. Why don't we do this? Here's a solution to immigration reform. Here it is for your consideration. Why don't we begin by let's already affirm, meaning arguably I met with Secretary Napolitano a couple of weeks ago, and I asked her, is the border secured? And her statement was, it's more secure now than ever before in American history. Matter of fact, it's more secure now than at any time during the Bush administration. So why do we continue to hear those that are opposed to immigration reform to say, the borders, we need to secure the borders first? What does that mean? No one's ever defined it. I've asked them. Not their staffers, the senators. What does it mean? And they never give me an answer. Well, we need to secure it first. What does that mean? Define secure it first. What does that mean? Well, it means that, of course, we can't guarantee that no one's ever going to come through, but it must be secured enough where people feel safe. We increased the number of Border Patrol agents. We're building walls, literally building physical walls. I mean, that's 21st century and we're building walls. Go figure. I mean, we have the virtual technology, satellite imaging, infrared technology. I mean, we have the technology, if we really wanted to. If we could read a license plate from 1,000 miles up in the middle of Afghanistan, don't you think we can find a family of 24 crossing the Rio Grande? Absolutely. It's not a matter of the tools, it's a matter of will. And there's some political components here to that, too. So the issue would be, again, secure the border, they say. I would say, let's demonstrate the border is already secured. Not completely secured. It will never be 100% completely secured. While there's poverty south of the border, while there's human suffering, people will find a way. Look at San Diego. They'll dig a ditch. They'll build tunnels. They will find a way. They will find a way. So, but let's demonstrate that it's already secure. Simultaneous to that, let's look at deporting the bad guys. Who are the bad guys? If you're a narco trafficker, if you're involved in nefarious activity, if you're a gangbanger, if you're here to corrupt our communities, obviously you're not here for a better day for your family. That's the 1.3%. Let's deport exclusively the felons, those that are here to really corrupt our society and our communities, that are not doing anyone any good. Let's deport them. But let's look at the 98% who have come here for a better day, who have come here, again, illegally. We understand that. But they've come here because across in Nuevo Laredo and in Ciudad Juarez, the narco traffickers have taken over. I always share the story, first-hand story, not hyperbole, first-hand story of that person who looked at me, that man in that church in Laredo, and that person who says, I am here because my 11-year-old daughter was sexually violated by a bunch of narco traffickers 5 miles across that river. I have a 9-year-old daughter. If you would have a 9-year-old daughter after your 11-year-old daughter was sexually violated, would you cross over to, and I said, I would cross over in a heartbeat. Absolutely. Now that's again, an anomaly. It's not the case for absolutely every single undocumented individual. But notwithstanding, there are some things that drive people to shift over. There are some migratory and economic realities that push these people to come over. They risk, life and limb to come over here, and it's not for some sort of exercise in futility. Let's address these 98% of individuals in such a way with our value system, with faith and compassion, where we provide some sort of pathway. We require them to learn English. We require them to go to the back of the line. You will go to the back of the line. You will pay fines and penalties. You will demonstrate financial sustainability and viability. You acquire civics courses 101. Understand what is this thing we call America. Require, by the way, that's not amnesty. Anyone who hears that list, that laundry list, you go back in the line, you admit guilt, pay fines, learn English, civics courses, wait anywhere between 10 and 15 years to become a citizen. If you still call that amnesty, you've had one too many mojitos. You really have. And there are people that are opposed to immigration reform that even though we give them this list, they still say that's amnesty. Well, that's just a lie. Oxford, Webster, read your dictionary. It's not Wikipedia, but read it. It's not amnesty. But that solution right there is what we call a just integration strategy. It's about integrating these individuals so the black market and these corresponding urban centers do not continue to thrive. That would be, in my opinion, a Leviticus 19, Romans 13 biblical solution to the immigration reform crisis. Immigration reform is about the vertical and the horizontal. It's about both things. We have to address it from both a vertical or a faith imperative and platform and from a public policy imperative that reflects our core values. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Let's get some questions.
Thank you again for coming. My question is, how likely do you think that is there will be comprehensive immigration reform under this administration?
Again, because of the business that I find myself in as a pastor and as the leader of the Hispanic Evangelical Association, my commitment is to lay it out. We had great hopes for this administration in the first 2 years. We had commitments on behalf of the President of the United States to our community, to me, to our community, to our leadership, that they would pass immigration reform in the first year. With a Democratic Congress and a Democratic President, we thought that would just be just a matter of ironing out the legislative calendar. Midterm elections, the House will probably shift over Republican. The Senate may or may not. During his administration, it's questionable. It's questionable. They're speaking now, they meaning both Republican and Democratic leaders are speaking about piecemeal implementation of immigration reform, addressing the issue, addressing maybe the DREAM Act. Everyone privy to the DREAM Act? Looking at the DREAM Act, looking at border security, and then having like a trigger system, multi-tiered implementation process. The likelihood of passing comprehensive immigration reform in the first term of the Obama administration right now is questionable at best. It's going to require a movement. It's going to require a mass movement. We need, instead of a Tea Party movement, we need a immigration reform / civil rights movement that will bring 500,000 people out, that'll push people in the streets, that'll include civil disobedience, nonviolent, peaceful protests, boycotts. The moment Hilton and Marriott and Hyatt and the hotel and the service industries that employ so many individuals that are classified as undocumented, be it intentionally or not, the moment that we call a boycott, a mass boycott, and we ask all these individuals not to go to work, the business industry, it's going to require that sort of 1960s revolutionary, let's push back definitively sort of movement, but unlikely. But we have faith, by the way. I'm praying. So it's.
We do. No, I don't really have anything to add besides what Sam's already said.
How would the Hispanic evangelical community respond to proposed immigration reform that would also include pathways to legal status for same-sex partners?
It's a great question. It's what I'm asked this week and last week. Been asked frequently on this. Our response has been the following. We believe both communities deserve their day equal footing as it pertains to presenting their own personal narratives. I think it's unfair for the gay and lesbian and transgender community to have their agenda morphed into immigration reform that's already so polarizing, and I think it's unfair for the immigrant community. It's the confluence of two very difficult and polarizing issues, and to join them, it's unfair. And I've had conversations with certain members of the gay and lesbian community. That's not fair for us. It's not fair for the Hispanic community. We deserve our day in the sun on our own right, and you all deserve your day to fight this without merging these two conversations. There's a reason for that. There are certain members of Congress who may be inclined in supporting immigration reform, but would not be inclined in supporting anything having to do with legitimizing, in their opinion, the gay and lesbian agenda. And then there are some that are committed to the gay and lesbian agenda that have a very strong border security constituency and say we're in favor of supporting the gay and lesbian agenda without a doubt, but we're not in favor of granting amnesty to undocumented. So we alienate two groups that would support, and both of our constituencies and both of our groups, our families or communities would be left out in the cold. So it's the idea of merging them together politically is going to work contrary to the outcomes and objectives of our corresponding communities.
we saw this somewhat in the healthcare debate,
Yeah.
where Sam and I were talking about this earlier, where we were trying to make sure that we were not fighting the issue of abortion in the context of healthcare. The same with immigration reform. Gay marriage and gay couples and ensuring that there are civil rights for gays and lesbians and their families is an issue, and certainly is an issue that should be actually dealt with in a comprehensive way, just like immigration reform should be dealt with in a comprehensive way. So it does come down to, how do folks who are trying to, get their agendas addressed as most expeditiously as possible, but it doesn't help sort of the cause in general to conflate those two issues. Both important issues, but to conflate them doesn't really help on either side.
How do you get to the Republican Party? How do you engage a Republican senator or congressman? There's two constituencies, business and the faith community. We were able to engage at least white evangelical and conservative faith leaders, not necessarily the pews completely yet, but the leadership. Really, to have the National Association of Evangelicals, Liberty University, the Southern Baptists support the just integration strategy I alluded to previously, that's historic. That's amazing. These are white conservative faith leaders supporting immigration reform. We will lose them. And if we lose them, they will call their corresponding members of Congress and say, do not support immigration reform. And then they're going to, again, it's going to work contrary to the communities, to both communities. Both communities will be.
It seems like the policies that you mentioned would clearly be more favorable to the Democratic Party. But how do we make this issue a bipartisan issue and really incorporate the Republican Party and kind of phrase the debate in their terms?
Social values, as it pertains not for the purpose of political outcomes, but meaning the values of isn't the Republican Party the family values party? Well, why would you articulate a family values platform and be in favor of deporting and separating families here, which is taking place, by the way? We're looking at mom and dad deported, the kids stay back in daycare. That took place. Those are stories from Utah and from Idaho and from Colorado. So let's look at the Republican Party and say, if you're really committed to family values, make sure your public policy and your commitment to immigration reform reflects that. That's how you do it. Address it through family values and again, through issues of security. If the Republican Party is a strong security party, you're permitting a black market, a second-tier society to take place. Narco trafficking, maybe arms dealing, and so forth and so on, because you don't want to provide some sort of pathway of integration for these individuals here. Talk about security and family values.
Yeah, and Sam really has had an unprecedented platform in speaking to Republicans and really pushing conservatives to take this up and to see this as an issue that is not, liberal or conservative, but it's about families, it's about faith, it's about morality, it's about making sure that the folks who are here can live here and can participate in our communities. I'm convinced that the reason why we've seen the kind of unprecedented speaking from the leadership in the faith community on this issue, and I mean it really does kind of go without exception, not just the evangelicals, the National Council of Churches, all of the Protestant denominations, all of the Jewish groups and organizations and denominations are all unified on this issue. And it's because, and this is what I've said over and over again to members and their staff, is these are the folks who are sitting in our pews. Yeah. These are folks that we know. These are folks that live in our community. This is a justice issue. This is not right. This can't continue.